Funding for Inner Compass is provided by Calvin College.
The life that's unfolding,
the world that awaits,
gifts that are yours to explore,
and God's to use.
It's all happening here at Calvin.
Welcome to Inner Compass. I'm Karen Saupe. Most of us know something about African American history in the United States, but what do we know about our local communities, our neighborhoods, the schools and churches and places we work? My guest today is a historian who's been exploring that question with regard to West Michigan. Join us on Inner Compass.
From the campus of Calvin College, this is Inner Compass, exploring how people use faith and ethics to guide them through critical issues of today.
My guest today is Randal Jelks, author of the book African Americans in the Furniture City, The Struggle for Civil Rights in Grand Rapids. Randal is director of the African and African Diaspora Studies minor at Calvin College. Welcome, Randal.
Thank you, Karen.
You got interested, or you got started on this project when the Grand Rapids Public Library asked you to study a lawsuit that you had probably never heard about before.
Well, I had heard from people I lived in the community that there was a lawsuit over public accommodations in Grand Rapids, but no one had ever gone to the archives to see exactly what it was. And the city historian, then city historian, Gordon Olson, was writing a book called The Grand Rapids Sampler. And he said, would you go to the archives and look this up? And the rest, as they say, is history. I mean, that's how I got it. That's right. The case that he had me look up immediately when I went to Kalamazoo, to the West Michigan Regional Archives, I immediately said, this is one of the earliest NAACP cases throughout the 20s challenging discrimination in public accommodations. So I wrote the Library of Congress, and the Library of Congress is a wonderful place, and I advise anybody to take a tour of it. But if you're a scholar, you almost have to go in naked, Karen, because you can't take your pencils, you can't, even your laptop. And but I've written them, and the librarian wrote me that there's an extensive file in the local chapter of the NAACP file holding about this case. And from that, I wrote an article about what happened in this case that reached the Michigan Supreme Court in 1927. Which essentially was called Emmett versus the Keith Theater, or Emmett versus Grand Rapids Operating Corporation.
Emmett Bolden. Right?
Emmett Bolden, right? And it overturned the kind of customary practice of making any patron who was African American sit in the balcony, no matter what ticket they bought. Had that case not gone that way, Michigan could have had formalized segregation laws as they had in the South.
Right, and so Plessy versus Ferguson, if we can back up a little bit.
1896.
Most of us are aware of that sort of vaguely, but that, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't that specify that that you could separate
long
races,
as it was equal,
as long as they both had access to the place?
That's right, it was never equal.
So the theater, where was the theater?
The theater was downtown, the headquarters on Lion Street today, where the headquarters for the local Fifth Third Bank is. Oh. And in fact, there's a plaque on it, on that building, about the case, because the Michigan Bar Association recognized it as the 22nd legal milestone in Michigan history as a result of the research that I did. Yeah.
So Bolden, as your book indicates, had to sit up in the balcony.
That's right.
Challenge that.
They planned to challenge it. He went to college. Had gone to Howard University, and then had gone to Howard University dental school in Washington, D.C., and planned to come back home and open a practice. And the only reason I could learn about him, because he was quite the baseball player, it announced it in the sports page that Emmett Bolden was coming back to open his dental practice. You would think it would have been someplace else, but it was on the sports page. Huh. And these were young men who had grown up in this community, and frankly were sick and tired of being discriminated. And they were college educated in the 20s, and they wanted to challenge the community and the community's ethos. Yeah.
And were successful in doing it.
And they were successful in doing it. Yeah.
Let's back up a little. from what I can tell from the book, the earliest African American settlers in Michigan, what, maybe early 1800?
In this region, there are always people of African descent more properly. As Michigan becomes a territory of the United States, African Americans are coming in just like all other settlers. And the first settlers really started coming in the 1840s. They are coming, from New York and Pennsylvania.
All right. So, and early on, there was a very small population, but were they fairly well integrated in with the rest of the community?
Well, sure. I
Grand
mean,
Rapids?
this was the frontier, so everybody was fairly well integrated. On the frontier, there was a rough egalitarian, a tree can fall on anybody, or you need your neighbor to help raise a roof. So in that regard, when Grand Rapids was still a village in 1837 and before, this is the frontier Indians, the native populations are still here, and so there's a rough egalitarian quality to it.
So we start Grand Rapids with a fairly healthy attitude toward race, or maybe not.
No. Race has never been healthy in the United States, and that's a tragedy of American history. Race is the first Constitution of Michigan attempted to exclude free people of color, as people of African descent were called. And they did exclude them.
When was that?
1837. The first Constitution of Michigan. Michigan's formed as a state in 1837. In its first Constitution, one requires that people who are free people of color have a bond. So they have to have extra money than anybody white who would come into state to guarantee that this is a way of blocking. And secondly, the first Constitution prevented African Americans from having any voting rights in Michigan. So from 1837 to 1872, African Americans are essentially here, present. Some are landowners, but they are excluded as citizens. So race is, from the very outset, an important. This issue is sort of like what we see today with immigrants coming in from, or illegal immigrants or undocumented, whatever, coming from Mexico. We fear the competition from cheap labor. And it was feared that if free people of color came from the Northeast end, that immediately some would be coming from the South, and that would create a dampening of wages and other things. So there was an attempt to block any methods of any kind of competition by free people of color in the state of Michigan early on.
Okay, so what you said before about sort of people working side by side was really more out of necessity than out of desire.
That's right. That's right. So the law said one thing. People felt individually one thing, but the law said another thing.
Okay. As the black community grew, and it was really a very small percentage of the population of Grand Rapids for a very long time.
Like less. Like 1%, less than 1%.
Okay.
The community was small, and then you see a spike in the community in 1870, of course, after the Civil War.
Okay. People coming from the South then?
No. Interesting, coming from Canada. The people who had escaped slavery and gone into Ontario. Were invited back. Again, it's the issue.
And it was safe to come back.
Right, but it's the issue of cheap labor.
Okay.
One of the patrons of Grand Rapids, Charles Comstock, he wants to recruit cheap labor to come work at a barrel making factory and here in Grand Rapids, and he recruits black laborers. He writes to Freedmen's Bureau trying to get people to come from the South. They're not coming, but he gets people from Canada to come.
And Comstock built living quarters for them and really created a segregated.
This was true of every sort of mini industrialist of the day. You can see in Grand Rapids still where all the old factories were. There were housing. There was no zoning laws.
Right.
So people lived in the neighborhoods where they worked at. They lived, or sometimes they lived next to the plants they worked in. So this was pretty typical of the time.
And was his factory, the barrel making factory, then largely employed black workers?
That's right. Employed black workers.
I think you said that in Grand Rapids that tended to be the case, that the factories tended to have ethnic.
That's right. It's true throughout the Midwest. One that I discovered is interesting is throughout the Midwest, industrialists played ethnic groups off one another. to keep them from having any kind of way of having collective bargaining. So, okay, guys, you don't, so your friend Joe got his hand cut off in the saw, and you want to organize against me. But there's another ethnic group coming off from here, from Germany or Poland, and I'm going to hire them instead of you. So that kept people in their place.
And that continued for a very long time.
Well, it continued all the way until to the 1930s, to the Great Depression.
Unions didn't take hold in Grand Rapids till fairly late.
Unions didn't take hold of Grand Rapids again to the late 30s, 40s, World War II era. Yeah, that's right. And Grand Rapids was effective in keeping unionization out of it.
Largely because of the kind of ethnically segregated
and also
factors.
it's a conservative city, and much more of the owners lived in town. And they had sort of patron relations with ethnic groups. Sometimes that was good. Sometimes that was not so good.
Okay.
But, right.
Can you? Were there positive effects for that? We go back to Comstock created these living quarters. Was that a good thing or bad thing?
Of course, it's a good thing. But when people had just claims, owners were saying, "Well, it's you don't like me personally," and it became a personal kind of issue rather than an issue of. But justice. We're getting our hands cut off in the sawmills, and we need guards and other things out there.
Right.
Well, I'll do the right thing for you eventually.
Trust me.
Trust me.
Okay.
That's right.
As the black population grew in Grand Rapids, they began to form societies. The one that really sort of tickled me was the Women's Study Club.
Oh yes, that's right.
And that I think was started for single African American women, right?
That's right. There was a ladies' married club, and then there was the one for young women. And we have to make women proper. And these women were all maids because they met on Thursdays, and in Grand Rapids that was Maids' Day off.
And when did this all begin to happen? These kind of social collectives, and why?
Well, this is a part of the. One of the interesting things is that this is a part of the fabric of the community in general. There were more women's clubs in Grand Rapids, I think, than anywhere in the United States. So there was these, and of course, women are, in general, shape this community.
Yes.
All of the kind of cultural apparatus, and so black women are doing the same thing. I mean, the study clubs are providing cultural outings. They are inviting poets.
And they're educational.
That's right. They're educational. They're reading the Bible. They're asking questions. So these women are doing the same thing in every community. Every ethnic community are really providing the fabric. Us guys, we're drones, but women are providing the thinking apparatus, the cultural. And black women are doing the same thing, and also doing the same thing in the churches as well.
Well, and that had to begin to be frustrating then, because as groups, ethnic groups got more educated and more interested in culture and so forth, began to seek higher education, right? And you talked about the men in the 20s. There was you have a picture in here of a group from the University of Michigan in which there are 5 or 6
that's right.
Grand Rapids African American men in that photo.
Well, you have to remember, Karen, that these are exceptional people.
Sure.
Yeah. It was exceptional in the 20s to go to college, period.
Right.
I mean, to have a high school education was, exceptional. Most people stopped in the 8th grade, if they were lucky to get an 8th grade education, and they went to work.
Most people of all races.
All races. African Americans probably did it earlier because there were no incentives in Grand Rapids for them to continue. This is one of the big questions. How do we keep people going to school? We want them to go to school, but education, whether we like it or not, has to have some tie-in to the economics.
Right. All of us are always taught that education is your key to success, and yet for young black men in the 20s and 30s, that wasn't working.
That's right. It wasn't working. And so these people were exceptionally focused and exceptionally talented. And people lived next to each other. It's not as though Grand Rapids was so residentially segregated as, say, Chicago began to be, or Detroit in the same period. And the insult to these people was, look, I grew up with you. I'm bright, I'm smart, and then you're telling me I can't go to the movie theaters, I can't do this. This is.
So you live side by side, but have to take separate parts of the store and the restaurant.
And people, I'm a person of standing in my community. I go, I'm honest, I do what I need to do. I remember one family told me that their grandmother learned Dutch because she had a little corner store and she needed to sell stuff to her Dutch neighbors. I mean, so this was so
there's every attempt to...
That's right.
You wrote about the Protestant work ethic having a really strong influence, especially in Grand Rapids, on
Yeah, I think that's underexplored among studies about African Americans, how the Protestant work ethics came to influence, and of course people adopt the culture that they're in. No, every city, all politics is they say is local, and every city has its locality, and the community, the Black community, is as conservative and as hardworking and thrifty as its other counterparts in various ethnic communities. And so I wanted to, one of the avenues I was trying to think about is, how did they think about this? How did they adopt this? And I had to follow the trails to churches. You would always see people preach hard work, hard work, hard work. I brought a friend from New York here, and he says, people go to bed early around here in Grand Rapids. And I said, yeah, well, people get up and go to work. Yeah. And he says, yeah, and I mean, in all communities, he was just struck by this. And I said, yeah, because people believe you got to give somebody a day, a hard day's work. And so this was a feature of the community. And how did African Americans adopt this too? And I wanted to kind of explore that issue.
Well, talk some more about the role of the church in building communities and cultures here.
Well, the church is the kind of stabilizing institution throughout the history of African Americans. Not all African Americans are Christians, and I should say that, and that's even in slavery. But churches have been these long-term institutions, and of course, the first institutions that people establish are their congregations. Their congregations are important to them. They form somewhere in the late between 1860, 1858. They're meeting in a house. Our churches carry culture, and they ritualize our cultures. And so African Americans form this church, and they're meeting until they can have enough people in town to have a church. And so St. Luke AME Zion meets, and then of course, because we have splits about denominational issues, by 1872 we have the African Methodist Episcopal Church, so we have two churches. By the 1880s, enough people have come in town. We have, of course, the woman named Catherine Carter helping form the Baptist Church in town, because each person has to, but they do worship side by side for a moment. But this was not that peculiar, because there was a Swedish Baptist church, there was an African Messiah Baptist church.
And lots of ethnic churches still worshiping in their own languages.
That's right. So this was not, or their own cultural style. This pluralism among Protestants existed all over the place. What happened? The difference is, though, for say white European ethnics, they were eventually integrate into the kind of sort of the blob of America, if I sort of put. Whereas African Americans, because a phenotype, will not be allowed to integrate into that sort of
a phenotype,
meaning the skin color,
physically different.
Physically different. That's right.
Or physically perceived
visible.
as different.
Yeah. Right. And not always physically visible, because some of the people I talk about are mixed race people.
Sure.
That's right.
Wasn't Plessy versus Ferguson, I think, was
that's right. Homer Plessy looked more European than anything, but Louisiana began this crazy laws about how much blood in you of an African that you have, and that would make you a person of African descent. Rather.
Well, and I mean, wasn't the story that he got on the train and they assumed he was white until he told them otherwise, and that's why he was able to challenge them. Well, back to Grand Rapids in Western Michigan. There came a point where there was a lot of struggle. Well, you write about Southern African Americans coming up into Grand Rapids, and the
the tension.
Yeah, between the previous settlers or the people that were already settled in
the previous settlers were now fitting into Grand Rapids. Their children were getting, schooling, and here come people from the Deep South. And this is, again, not especially any different than any other group. Here comes our country cousins, and we are embarrassed by them. They're coming with their deep Southern ways. They're rural. Grand Rapids by 1890 is 60,000 people, so it's a city, a major city. So you have city ways, and then you've got people coming from the Deep South with sort of country bumpkins, and they're loud in their expression. They're more earthy than urbane, and so there's tension, and the tension comes out about religion, because Southern blacks have retain more of their African cultural lifestyle. There's clapping, there's praise the Lord, there's shouting in church, and the Northerners see this as, oh, these people are so embarrassing to us. So, and there is real tension about the religious expression, and it comes out because the church is the only place people really have power in. So the struggles about this come out in the churches.
Yeah. Well, where did Grand Rapids churches go right and wrong then in dealing with that tension? And
well, among African Americans themselves, of course, what happens is, well, in Protestantism in general, well, you don't like us? Well, we'll start our own church. So True Light Baptist Church starts, Pilgrim Rest Baptist Church starts. You see this in the late 20s, this flourishing of other new churches starting because the people at Messiah was too snooty. The people at the First African Methodist Episcopal Church, St. Philip's Episcopal Church, well, they're really snooty because they have this high liturgy. And we are just plain folk, and we want to really praise the Lord, and that's how. So that sort of fragments, or it doesn't create the fragmentation, but it sure doesn't cure it. Right? Well, and then churches compete. Who's going to get the newcomers coming in? So now it's on, and of course, pastors are entrepreneurial like they are today, and every pastor wants to be seen in front of the masses of people. That was true among African Americans. So much so, though, at times it interfered with coming together about pertinent issues that affected the community. So you had churches saying they wanted a social center. So if we put it in First Community AME, I'm not going to attend because, well, that's there. That's not my church. That's not my church. So that became problematic. Randal, we could talk for hours about this, and there are lots more questions I have for you, but let me end by asking, what did you learn from preparing this book that gives you ideas about how we should proceed in the future in Grand Rapids? Well, the real idea that I got from the book is that, first of all, this is a problem of the Midwest. It's not simply our city, although we're a part of it. Today, the Midwest is the most segregated regions in the country, the most segregated cities in the country. The most segregated is Detroit, Chicago's second, Cleveland, all of these major cities. All right in our area. All in the Great Lakes areas. So the problem of how industrialists, and I'm not blaming them, paired off people from each other over their livelihoods has come home to roost. So we need to address that issue. In our own city, we need to address that issue if we're going to be a global city that is inviting all people. The second issue, that the exclusion out of educational resources, is the second thing that I've learned. In the 1950s, we had an opportunity to really meet the needs of new people coming into the city who had limited education, just as migrants are coming into the city. And we didn't marshal the political will to do that at that time. We kept the model of segregation and told. Opposite of that, the Chamber of Commerce began to diversify the economy of Grand Rapids in the 50s, seeing that as a good for the city, but the educational opportunities, it didn't. And that also hurts us today. Grand Rapids, for a city its size, has a very small middle class among African Americans, and that's what most Americans want to create. Whereas the comparable cities our size have have created larger African American middle class by having better educational opportunities and access to education. So that's the other thing I learned for the future. That's why I'm such an advocate for public schooling, because that's the future. The other thing that I think that I learned is that ordinary men and women, working men and women, no matter what their color, need people to help them provide collective bargaining in discussion with large corporate entities, so that, that there's a balance between, we need a healthier balance between them. I think entrepreneurship and ownership is great, but I also think that the kind of needs of healthcare and other things may come if we have other kinds of entities to balance off.
We have to learn how to negotiate and compromise.
Right, that's right. And we do it in all our institutions in some form or fashion. I think it gets a negative name in Grand Rapids, but I don't think it needs to be like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Randal.
Thank you, Karen.
My guest today has been Calvin College history professor Randal Jelks, author of the book African Americans in the Furniture City: The Struggle for Civil Rights in Grand Rapids. I'm Karen Saupe. Thank you for watching Inner Compass.
Funding for Inner Compass is provided by Calvin College.
The life that's unfolding,
The world that awaits.
Gifts that are yours to explore.
and God's to use.
It's all happening here at Calvin.